and welcome to the studio. I have a solution to a problem that you may have, and that is the problem of wavy, bumpy, wrinkled paper when you try to do a wet underpainting. I don't know about you, but I am so frustrated when I want to do a wet underpainting and my paper dries all wavy and buckled and I have to try to flatten it, and it's just frustrating. And one solution is to mount your paper. I know that, but I don't always want to spend time or expense mounting all of my paper. So I have a couple of tips for you today, and then I want to do a demo to show you how well this works. So I hope you enjoy this video today, and if you do, I want you to be sure to subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Subscriptions are free. Hit the notification bell so you know when there's a new video released. I'm trying to release a new video or repurpose content from my Patreon page every Sunday. So we'll see. I want to do that. But I would love your help. Give some comments. It really does help spread the channel to other artists. And so I really appreciate that. All right. So what are those tips I'm talking about? Two things. The type of paper that you use for pastel painting does matter, and I love all kinds of paper, and each paper has its place. But when I want to do a wet underpainting and I don't want to mount my paper, I'm turning to LuxArchival sanded pastel paper. LuxArchival is a sanded paper. It comes in white. It's about a 400 grittiness in the sanded surface, so it's just the right amount of sanded surface, I think, for me. It's on nice thick paper card. I'll hold a piece up so that you can see. I should have taken one out already, but if you could only feel it through the camera, look at how nice and sturdy it is. But the best thing about this paper is I don't care how wet you get it or what you use to wet it, it does not buckle. And I don't mount it, it just dries flat. So you do a watercolor underpainting. I'm going to do a water wash today. It will dry flat and you can get painting right away. The other tip that I want to share with you is how I mount the paper to my board. So come a little closer. I actually like to make taped hinges, and I don't think you can see it very well here, but basically I can easily pull the paper off the hinges and reuse them. But let me show you how I do it. I take artist tape. So artist tape comes in all colors. I use black and white, and I basically put a piece sticky side up, and then when I want to attach it to the board, and I'm using foam core board, I just put another piece like so. And what I'll do is I'll put a piece in all four corners, and if I know I'm going to be especially do a really wet underpainting, I'll also do the sides. But really it's not necessary, but all four corners, and then again you can pull it off when you're done and reuse those hinges as long as it's still sticky. I don't, it just saves on tape because I don't have to tape the whole entire painting. I can just use a few simple tape hinges and it works really well, and it works especially well with this LuxArchival, which does not buckle. Alright, so what I want to do is put it to the test. I'm saying that it's not going to buckle, so let's see if that is the case. And we're going to paint today some mountains, and I just want to share with you, if you like this content, if you like my videos, if you like this instruction, join us, become a Patreon insider. If you haven't heard of Patreon, it's just a place where you go and you pledge a monthly pledge. In my case, it's $4 a month. You have access to 4 years of content. And this month, we are working on painting mountains. So if you're an insider, you'll get even more mountain tips and tricks. So I have already done a very quick drawing of my big simple shapes, and the way I like to paint with pastels is I like to go from simple to complex, to thin layers to thicker layers, to add the detail closer to the end of the painting and just start very simply. And I want to do one of the most simple underpaintings you can do, a wet underpainting, and that is using some can you see these? hard pastels. These happen to be Nupastel brand, and I'm going to do this time a warm and cool underpainting. So I'm going to put warm colors where I see the sunlight and cooler colors where it seems to be cooler or in the shadows. So let us start with the darkest areas, and they're cooler, and those are the darker trees that are over on the right hand side. And I'm going to just apply the pastel in a very, very light, thin layer. And I'm going to do something that is not really visible in my reference photo, but I'm going to create a very dark kind of zigzag shape through this meadow. So I have a meadow of wild lupine or lupin flowers. So I want to draw the eye through that area, and I'm going to establish a dark pathway underneath every, oops, there goes the blue. I'm going to put in a little bit of a dark green as well. I'm using a very, very light touch because I'm going to liquefy this with water to create a wet underpainting. Alright, so where else is it cool? Well, we have this distant mountain shape that we can use a cool color. So I'm going to use some blue for that. There's some blue in the shadows of this mountain here. And let's see, there's warm colors and there's sunlight on these mountains, so I'm going to use a warm orange. Make the one in front a little bit darker. And I have two ways to go with this foreground area. I want it to be cooler colors because it's kind of cooler and in the shadows. So I'm going to just go ahead and take the blue that I used in the mountains and put it down here. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, that's great, but what about those purple flowers? I have, when I'm adding flowers to a meadow, there's a couple of things that I take into consideration. How, and I'm using a pale blue for the sky. How large are the flowers you're going to put in? If they're larger than an inch on the finished painting, I'll put them in the underpainting. So we've got a couple of these flowers that are sticking up, and they are actually larger than an inch. There's a few other in the meadow that are larger than an inch. But there's a bunch others that are kind of lost in the grasses that are going to be smaller than an inch. And in that case, I know that I can always add them as I'm layering the pastel once the underpainting dries. So this is my very first layer, and what I want to do is I want to liquefy it with a little water. I could also use rubbing alcohol, and you've heard of alcohol wash. It's the same effect, but you can also do water, and I'm going to do water because water tends to take a little bit longer to dry, and if you are doing a underpainting with water, water, I think, tends to buckle some sanded papers faster than the rubbing alcohol, because the rubbing alcohol will dry a little bit faster. So this is a better test of how well this paper will hold up to a wet wash by using the water. So I'm also using a very stiff bristle brush. This is Princeton children's paintbrushes, and to me they make the most perfect underpainting brushes because they're stiff. I can really scrub in the color, the paint, the pastel, and they're inexpensive, so I don't mind the sanded paper causing them to be ruined, which they will after a few uses. Alright, and I'm just working my way down. Oftentimes when I'm doing a wet underpainting, I'm going to work from the darkest, the lightest colors to the darkest colors, so that they don't get as contaminated. But if you're careful and you rinse off your brush, you can do it. You can do it either way. All right, now we've got the Meadow. And so I'm looking forward to having some interesting drips and dribbles and fun, unexpected, or happy accidents that I can respond to when I start adding the pastel layers. Getting to wrapping this part of the painting up. And one thing I will say is if you're doing a wet underpainting, take your time. I like to say, you're not a house painter. Don't rush through it. Take your time and really explore the direction that you're going to make your brush marks. So in other words, if I'm painting flowers that are upright, I'm making upright brush strokes. If I'm painting bushy trees, I'm going to move my brush so that I get a bushy brush stroke. So, if you're a house painter, you're going to go from top to bottom and you're going to be very careful. But you're an artist, not a... How did this one get so blue? All right, if you make a mistake, because I think that got too blue, I want to add a little more peach, go right ahead and paint over the water, and that's going to be perfect. So you can already starting to see this warm mountain glowing against the shadowed areas in the cooler color. So I'll be excited to see what happens in the next stage when I add the pastel layers. And we'll let this dry and I'll be right back. All right, I am back. I would say it took about 20 minutes or so to dry completely, and I have not touched it. It has dried completely flat. So if you are used to the buckling and waviness of some papers when they're dry, I didn't touch it. It dries perfectly flat, so I'm ready to paint. And I just do want to point out, though, that I'm raving about this wonderful paper. I'm not sponsored in any way by any products that I use. They are just the products that I like to use. I find they work well for me, and that's where I'm at with that. All right, I'm going to start applying my soft pastels, and I'm going to show you the set that I'm using. And this is Terry Ludwig Soft Pastels. This is the Floral Landscape Set. And this is the set that I curated for Terry Ludwig based upon my floral landscapes, but I have used it for all kinds of landscapes. It's just a well-rounded set. I like it because it's got a really good range of colors and values, intense colors, dull colors, darks and lights, and everything that you need for a good landscape painting. So I'm going to start, as I do always, by reinforcing the dark areas. And I'm going to go right in with hard pastels. Now I do know that a lot of times artists will start with a harder pastel before they move into a softer pastel. I find, and that works perfectly well, and I'll do that occasionally, but I also find that when I use a light enough touch with my pastel application, I can go right in with my soft pastels and start my layering process. And what I'm going to do first is reinforce the dark areas. Now remember, in the underpainting I put in this kind of suggested dark pathway, if you will, leading through the meadow. So I'm taking a dark blue pastel and I'm reinforcing that dark area, and I'm also starting to paint the evergreen trees that are over here in the shadows, and I'm using kind of an upright mark and pulling the pastel, using the pastel on its side, but making kind of a linear mark and then pulling the pastel out to kind of suggest the way the foliage on these evergreens will grow. And I decided I'm going to put another couple of those dark evergreens over on this side, because it's really going to serve to enhance the glow on that mountain. So that's one layer of dark, and I'm going to go ahead and add a second layer of dark using a very light touch. Now I took the time to do a wet underpainting, so my goal is to try not to cover it up completely. I'm not always successful with that, but if I know that I use a light enough touch when I apply the pastel, I'm going to have a better chance of preserving some of that underpainting, letting some of that underpainting peek through. I'm adding a kind of a dark burgundy for my third layer of dark. And now, because after all, those dark areas are green, I'm going to go ahead and add some darker green. Now this painting is going to go through an ugly stage where it's going to just look like a mess of marks. And I know from experience that a lot of times when people are watching my videos or my demos even, and they see this ugly stage, they think, okay, nothing's happening here, and they move on. But I really want to encourage you to stick with the video till the end. I usually, this part takes, I don't know, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes typically, and then I'll be able to finish the painting. And I'll be able to hopefully get it through that ugly stage. Alright, so now I have some greens. I used a dark warm green and a dark cool green, and I think I'm finished with the dark areas. The next step that I usually take is to establish the lighter areas. In this case it's the sky, and I always really like to establish the sky early on in a painting because it really, to me, sets the whole mood and tone of the painting. What type of, well, it establishes what kind of day it is, what kind of light conditions are part of the scene. So I'm going to make it, it's a blue sky day. Now actually in my reference photo there's some kind of thick banded light colored clouds, and I think I'll try to add a hint of those clouds, and I think I'm going to use a pale yellow down here at the horizon just to kind of promote that glow. But I don't want to spend too much time making too many clouds and too much going on in the sky, because we're going to have a lot going on here on the ground, so we really want to keep the sky fairly simple. So basically I used 1, 2, 3 different colors in the sky, plus that underpainting. I used a light enough touch that you can see that blue of the underpainting peeking through. So I'm going to leave that alone for the time being. The next thing I think I want to do is work on these mountains, and then I'll work my way to the meadow. So we'll kind of work from the top down to the bottom. So we have 3 layers of mountains. We have a peak back here, this middle range, and then there's one right in front. And I know that typically things are going to get lighter, cooler, duller, less detailed the further back you go. So I have selected a grayed down blue that I'm going to use for this most distant mountain peak. And I can, I've already changed the shape of that peak. Instead of making it a cone shape, I'm letting it go off the paper. Also using it to break up my evergreen trees. I have to clean that up just a bit. I'll take the sky color and clean that up. It's okay if you are painting mountains and you're just trying to paint a generic type mountain range. In other words, you're not concerned that it looks just like the mountain peaks. It's not meant to be recognizable. For example, it's just a generic mountain range. Then you can make changes to suit your composition. If, however, you are attempting to paint a well-known mountain range that people recognize, like say the Teton Mountains with their really distinct craggy peaks, then you have to be a little bit more careful about the contour and the way you make those peaks. So like I'm changing the peak on the middle mountain, I've changed the peak on the distant mountain, and I give myself permission to do that because really I don't feel like this particular painting it's about any specific mountain range. All right, so now I want to work on this foreground peak, and there's little tiny tree shapes. So I'm going to take my dark green and just kind of make some marks to hint at some trees. And then this mountain is peach, but it's a little bit of a deeper or darker value peach than the one that's going to be behind it. So I'm going to take kind of a middle dark value peach color, carve into the tree shapes that are meeting the bottom where the peak meets the grasses, the grassy area. I want to let a lot of that underpainting peek through because the underpainting they're perfect colors. Now I already put in some of the blue shadow areas, so now what I want to do is put in some of those sunlit areas. So I'm going to use a lighter value peach and really use a light touch because I like that orange that's in the underpainting. So I'm using a super light touch. I'm even going to leave that little orange mark right there. I don't really need to put a lot of detail in these mountains because I want them to look like they're in the distance. And the more detail I put on them, then the closer they'll appear. You know, they'll try to come forward. I'm going to use a little bit of a mauvey gray just to add a little bit more variety to this peak right in here. And there's some, let's see if this will be the right color. There's some kind of, looks like some grayish green areas on this mountain that look like maybe there's trees on these slopes. So I have a grayed down lighter value green that I'm using to add some detail there. One other thing I can do is I'm noticing that some of the green trees on this mountain are sticking up. So I'm going to just put some of those there just to give a little variety to that edge. And then just so that we can see the separation. A little bit more over here. But at this point, I'm finding that I have to stop because I'm getting a little bit too fussy. And I've said this before if you watch my demos. A lot of times we get carried away in one particular area because we think that it needs something, and so we keep working on it, and we don't do anything to the rest of the painting, and ultimately it really doesn't allow us to judge what needs to be finished. It's a lot easier when we keep moving around the painting. Okay, so I've done enough on the mountains. I've finished the sky. There is a little bit of snow cover on that distant mountain. If I do want to put some of that in, I'm going to use, let's just try, I'm going to use a very light grayed down pink just to hint at some of that snow cover. But it's really not about that, so just a few little marks is all it needs. Alright, now we get to move forward into our meadow area. We've got our suggested pathway. We've got a bunch of purple flowers scattered throughout. I believe they were lupin or lupine, however you pronounce those. I want to put a little color underneath the grass. It's very, very green, and I really would like to add a little bit of interest, dirt color I like to call this, before I add all the green. So I'm going to take the colors that are on the mountain, which I would naturally feel like that would be part of the dirt, right? The same type of rocks and that kind of thing. So I'm going to carry some of that peachy, reddish brown color down into this foreground meadow area. And now I can then put the greens on top of it and also start with adding the purple flowers. I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to start to add just a hint of purple so that some of these purple flowers can be hidden under the grasses. So if I put them in this like underneath kind of stage, then it will be easier for them to be hidden. We don't want all our flowers to look like they're pasted on top. Alright, so I'm going to, before I add any more green, I want to actually make sure all of this is fixed into place so they don't mix with my other layers. So I'm going to use a little bit of Workable Fixative. I use Blair Very Low Odor, which I can't seem to find anymore. So I have like, I might have 2 cans left, and then I have to it's not available. If any of you guys know where to find this, Very Low Odor by Blair, let me know in the comments. I'd love to be able to get some more, but I'm working on experimenting with alternatives. The reason why I like the Blair is because it does a super job of making things dark. Now normally you don't want that in a fixative, but in this case it darkens and kind of dulls everything and allows me to make it a little bit more interesting on top, and it does a weird thing where it really gives you a feeling of texture that I haven't been able to get from other Workable fixatives. But again, I haven't been able to find it lately. Alright, so now I'm going to start to add the greens and then add the purples. I added a little bit of those kind of a hint of violet, that these are going to be underneath. I'm going to go ahead and block in some of the larger flower heads. And I know some of them are, it's the point of view, we're kind of looking up, so we can see some of these taller ones are coming up over the mountains, but then we see smaller ones in the background. So it's kind of an odd point of view. So I'm going to make some of them smaller, but then some of them actually are going to stick up. Let's stick up 3. That's a good number. And I'm pressing much harder. I don't know if you can tell, this is a much more solid mark compared to the very light touch that I was using previously. But as I get closer to finishing, I use a much heavier touch so that we have a contrast of our marks. Add a little bit more green down in that corner. Okay, so we're going to add a little bit of light on the edges of our trees. They're in shadow basically, but they're catching a little bit of light. And then we're going to start to add some green to our meadow. And it's okay at this point if I start to cover up some of those purple flowers. That was the reason behind me putting in a lot of them early on. And I'm going to increase to have a warmer, more yellowy green down here, because there's some other kind of things growing down here that are more of a yellow green. Different kind of wildflower or grass or shrub. There's also a whole bunch of white things growing in here, and I really, you know, when you are painting a wildflower meadow, you don't have to necessarily copy everything you see in the photo. What your goal is to make an interesting arrangement of colors and shape that help the viewer kind of travel through the painting. So maybe these lighter kind of pale green hints at these flowers will help the viewer's eye move through this meadow area. So I'm getting to the point where I'm going to start to increase my level of detail. I'm going to give it another quick spray. And sometimes I even like to spray it so that it's not perfect, like a little splatter. That gives a little bit more texture to my meadow. I put a few more of the purple flowers in. I covered so many that I now need to make a few more appear, but that's the nature of the way this works. Put a few in, take a few out, put a few in, take a few out, and think about how the eye is going to move through the painting. So basically, if I want you to come into the painting, I want you to go over here. Then I want you to go over here. Then I want you to go over here. And then I want you to leave the painting, exit gracefully, if you will. So I've got enough into place where I'm now going to start to really add the more detail in certain places. We don't have to have detail everywhere, but we want detail and contrast where we want the viewer's eye to look. So as I'm making the finishing marks, I'm trying to be mindful of how I want the viewer's eye to move around the painting. And what I'm finding is I've got this middle area that feels a little bit empty. So I'm going to just add a few more into this middle area, and then a few more just on the outskirts, if you will. Now, let's take a look at these flowers. Right now they're just blobs, but in actual, the way they are really, the way they actually really grow is they have little kind of petals coming off that center, right? So we've got like this crown, and then we've got these petals coming off the center. Right now I'm using a hard pastel so that I can go in and make a little bit more fine detail. So I'm trying to create the shape. But as with everything, I start with a simple shape and then I gradually refine it to get more and more detail. And also, these guys have some lighter blue areas. Blue violet. That's a little bit too light. I actually have this will work. I have a box, I call it my blue bonnet box. And whenever I paint purple flowers of any kind, lavender, blue bonnets, lupin, I take out the blue bonnet box because it's got a really nice variety of purples. But I think this is going to do the trick. Oh, thank you. Here it is, my blue bonnet box. Oops. It's got a really nice variety of purples that give me the opportunity to add a little bit of, I'll just put it right here. You can have a look at that. So I can have a little bit more variety in my flowers. And right now I'm pressing super hard. I'm making little tiny marks to say, okay, look at these flowers, look at the way they are made. They're comprised of a bunch of smaller petals of different shades of violet and even sometimes pinks. Now, right now, they're all floating. There's purple things floating on the grass. So we have to integrate them into the grass, and we have to give some stems, not all of them, but some of them. So I'm going to take out a box of hard pastels, some Nupastels, and I'm going to use them to give some guys, some of these, some stems, and I'm just making a very kind of, I call this dancing my pastel across the paper, just so that I can get some broken lines, because if I press too hard and too firmly and with not enough like looseness in my mark making, I'll end up with balloons rather than stems. The other thing that so I'm going to just add some of these harder edge scribbly marks to kind of indicate some of the grasses that are growing in this meadow. The other thing that I can do is take out some super soft pastels, and the set I've been using lately are these. It's the Paris set of Sennelier Pastels, and these are nice because they are soft, and they make wonderful soft marks on top of all of the other softer pastels that I've used. So it works really well for those finishing marks if you really want to get some nice contrast of mark making. And so I'm going to use some of this to create some of the foliage on these flowers. And the foliage is nice because it gives a little variety to we have so much going upright marks, so these allow me to get a little bit more of a horizontal mark making action going on. So what happens next? Let me just tighten this. We're getting to the finish. What happens next is I sit here, I evaluate it, and I'm going to step away from it, and then I'm going to come back and we'll finish. Because here's the thing. If you don't step back when you get to the end of the painting and you just keep painting and you're not paying attention and you're just, because you're enjoying it, you're having fun, I'm having fun, but I'm not really mindful of what's happening, it's really easy to overwork and ruin a painting. So I'm going to step back and I'll come right back and we'll finish. Alright, I am back, and what I have decided once I stepped away is that I'm satisfied with the mountains and the sky, and I just want to give a little bit more refinement on a few of these flowers and a little bit more light in the grasses, because it seems very, very dark at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and use a lighter purple just to give a little bit of light at the tips of some of these flowers. And one thing is I always, when I'm doing these finishing marks, is I want to be careful that I don't give an equal amount of treatment or clarity to every single flower, because if that happens, then none of them really stand out, right? They all have equal treatment, so they all, no one is the star. So I have to have some stand out. So these guys have a lot more detail in the center for your eye to enjoy, and then I want to have some of these other smaller guys with not a lot of detail that are just kind of hanging out. I don't know if that makes sense. If everything is the same, then we won't know where to look, basically. So I want to next give a little bit more light in the grass. So I'm using a lighter yellowy green just to kind of hint at, I like sometimes bringing some of the grasses up over the mountain like there, so that we can create a layered feeling, you know, like this is in the foreground and those are in the distance. And just a little bit more light kind of working its way in through the foliage. And actually a little bit more dark down at the bottom, so that we kind of ease into the painting and start to enjoy what's happening here in the grasses. And I'm using the Sennelier pastels for these finishing marks. A lot of times I end my video at this point and then I end up going back and adding a few marks. So this video is a little bit longer because I really wanted you to see those finishing marks. But a lot of times they seem like they're mindless. So they're hard to explain. But I guess if I had to explain what I'm doing, basically what I'm doing is trying to find ways to guide the viewer's eyes through the painting. Ultimately, that's my final wish. So I'm adding a few really bright, look at this, I hardly have to press, some really bright yellow-green marks. Just, I call those spice marks, just just little pieces of eye candy that help move the eye around the painting. The other thing that I might want to do is, if we get up to the top of the painting here, you know, we see these flowers kind of peeking out over the mountain. We get up to the mountains, but we need to move beyond the mountain. So I really want your eye to move out of the sky or down in through the sky. So what I can do, and remember earlier I said I wasn't going to spend too much time on the sky, but I think it does need some firmer, thicker cloud marks. So I'm taking that really super soft Sennelier pastel and pressing really hard just to kind of give some directional pull so that your eye kind of follows those thicker clouds and then goes down into the painting. And I'm going to just add a few touches of those darker trees on the slope so that you can sense the scale, that this is kind of far back, because look at how small those trees are. Just a few of them help give you that feeling. And I really love this super dark green. So this, I'm going to just enhance the shadows in these trees, and that's going to really pull out the light and make the light shine a little bit more. And let's just make a harder edge mark of peach up on the mountain, and then I'm going to call it done. And if you ever get to this point in a painting and you're like, you're still making marks and you're still not sure if you're done, I advise you to make it so that you say, okay, I'm going to make 3 marks and then I'm going to step back. Then I'll come back and I'll make 3 more marks, but then I'm going to step back. And that will help prevent you from overworking. So I'm going to call this one finished. I hope you've enjoyed the demo, and I hope you've enjoyed the tips of the LuxArchival paper that you don't need to mount it. You can throw any kind of liquid at it and it's going to stay flat. And of course those tape hinges, those are a winner. So I hope you've enjoyed this demo. Be sure to give me a thumbs up, give me a good comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you want more, become a Patreon insider. I'd love to have you join our group. And thanks for watching.